I will introduce Professor Arosha. Thank you so much for joining us today. So Arosha is a professor of software engineering at the Open University. His research and teaching focuses on software engineering for adaptive systems. He has a particular interest in techniques for building adaptive security and privacy mechanisms for ubiquitous Internet of Things systems. That's a bit of a mouthful, that one. He has led research on adaptive systems as a PI and co-I on multiple projects funded by the EPSRC, the ERC, and Qatar's National Research Foundation, working in application domains including healthcare and policing. Sounds like you've been busy. He is the co-lead of the Future of Responsible Technologies workstream of the OU's Centre for Protecting Women Online and is currently the Associate Dean and Director of STEM Research. So over to you, Arosha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here and for inviting me to come along and give this talk today. As you heard from my bio, I've kind of worked in lots of different areas, but with a key theme of software engineering and particularly adaptive software engineering. And in the context of the work I'm going to talk about today, that interest has been developing and refining itself into a focus on thinking about the role of responsible software engineering in the future technologies that we build. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. As was mentioned, I'm part of the OU's Centre for Protecting Women Online, and I'll talk a bit more about that centre as well. Before getting into the details of my talk, I just wanted to have this reminder and acknowledgement that my talk today will address some sensitive topics relating to women's safety online, including the harms caused by certain types of content and gender-based violence. So please do to step out at any time and rejoin when you feel ready. If the topic is something that affects you, take a break whenever you need to. And if you feel overwhelmed, please make your well-being and safety a priority. If you need further support, of course, there are things like the OU's Employee Assistance Program and other services that are available, including a network of mental health first aiders to talk to as well. So I just wanted to start with that note and make sure that everyone felt comfortable in making their own well-being and safety a priority. I was invited here today to talk because this week and yesterday in particular was White Ribbon Day, and this is a day that is an international day of awareness when people stand up against violence against women and girls. And it also marks the beginning of the UN Women program called 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. And this year, that particular campaign has a focus on stopping online abuse and with this hashtag no for online abuse. And yesterday I had the real privilege of being part of an event in Milton Keynes where colleagues at the OU had crafted versions of our OU Shield, kind of highlighting issues around women's safety and gender-based violence as part of a craftivism exhibition relating to the White Ribbon campaign. And there was a vigil at the MK Rose in Campbell Park, which I had the privilege of taking part in. It was rather cold, but there were quite a lot of us out there as well, which was great to see. And that is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on the ongoing challenges we face in the world in terms of violence against women and girls, which is a real concern and a serious issue. And also for men to reflect and have the opportunity to make the White Ribbon Pledge, which is a promise to never use, excuse, or remain silent about men's violence against women. And that's a pledge that I'm very happy to make. So the topic of my talk today focuses on a particular form of gender-based violence, which is called technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what this means and sharing a few examples of common ways in which this form of violence manifests in the world. And I'd like to acknowledge and say a huge thank you to my colleague, Professor Miriam Fernandez, who's also a researcher based in the Center for Women, Protecting Women Online and the Knowledge Media Institute at the OU, who put some of these slides together for a different talk and kindly allowed me to use them here because they convey this message very nicely and clearly. So technology-facilitated gender-based violence refers to acts of violence that are committed, assisted, aggravated, or amplified using information and communication technologies or other digital tools. And it's a form of action that can result in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological, social, political, or economic harm or other infringements of rights and freedoms of women in particular. And so there is a distinction between technology facilitated gender-based violence and another term that you may have come across in this area, which is online violence against women and girls, or OWAG, as it's sometimes pronounced. And technology facilitated GBV or gender-based violence is a broader term. It includes any type of technology, including mobile phones, smart speakers, location tracking devices, and so on. Whereas OWAG primarily focuses on the violence that happens in online digital spaces. But they're both really serious issues and things that we need to address, and it's a particular focus of the UN Women's Organization, particularly in this year's campaign of 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. So what are some of the common forms of technology-facilitated gender-based violence? And I'm sad to say that there are quite a range of them, and I'm going to quite quickly work through these, but I'm very happy to explore and take questions on any of them later on. So I start with cyber stalking. So this is using technology to make repeated or unwanted surveillance or threats against women. Um, and digital technologies are enabling stalking behaviors through these technologies very effectively. So last night, when I was at the vigil at the MK Rose, a woman very bravely and generously shared an experience of where a former partner of hers had used Google Alerts to get notifications when her name appeared on any website, and was able to use this to locate her after they had separated and she had moved to a completely different part of the country when her company posted her name as part of their staff website on a public website, and that Google alert enabled this former partner to locate her, and that's an example of technology being used in this way to locate and surveil people and cause harm to them. Um, and there are other forms of technologies that are built and developed for other maybe what are seen as benign and necessary purposes, like parental monitoring apps to help, assure safety of children, but they are often misused and by those who are cyber stalkers and perpetrating gender-based violence. Online hate and harassment is a very common form of technology-facilitated gender-based violence using the capabilities of online platforms to target women and have this effect of trying to silence or prevent women's participation in um, in online spaces and in public life more generally by posting hostile or abusive messages, making comments, or posting images in harassing ways. And two particular examples here were the examples of the journalist Carol Cadwallader, who exposed how personal data belonging to millions of Facebook users was collected by Cambridge Analytica and used for political advertising, and that made her the target of a lot of online abuse from those who felt that she had other political motivations for making these, sharing these stories and so on. But they were targeting her also because she was a woman. Similarly, Diane Abbott was a prominent Labour MP who was targeted in a similar way, uh, both based on being a woman and being one of the first, well, the first Black woman politician in the UK as well. So that um, these are examples of online hate and harassment, which I'm sure you're already familiar with as well. So let me move on to another form of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, which is online sexual harassment. So this is the sending of unsolicited sexual content, making lewd comments or making sexual requests of people, and include things like cyber flashing, the sending of explicit images without consent. Um, and this is facilitated both on online platforms, but in some also in the ways in which digital devices were configured by default when they were first launched. So Apple's AirDrop feature, for example, was often misused in this way because men were sending explicit images to available phones in their locality in different situations. And that was a particularly egregious form of the cyber flashing behavior, which thankfully has now been addressed by changing the features and the way the defaults of those technologies are set up. But it is telling that these were not considered in the design and deployment of these technologies, these issues, and addressed upfront. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Other forms of image-based abuse are also very common, so sharing intimate images without consent. And these are things that are now somewhat addressed through new legislation like the Online Safety Act, which makes it illegal to create or store or share these types of images, but it remains a significant issue. And that needs to be looked at more carefully and addressed at its root. Artificial intelligence is another form of technology, and it is being abused in the context of technology-facilitated gender-based violence, being used to generate pornographic imagery, being used to create applications that allow photographs that might have been provided with consent to be modified to depict people in states of undress. So these so-called nudifying apps were something that came about as a result of these artificial intelligence technologies. And again, these are examples of technologies that were built and developed with some benign purpose in mind originally, but then are often repurposed in these very harmful ways without any kind of consideration of the potential harms that could be perpetrated. And that's a real concern. Sextortion is a type of online blackmail. So criminals threaten to share sexual imagery, sometimes real, sometimes not real, and it could be linked to cybersecurity in the sense of sometimes this involves hacking someone's account to gain access to personal intimate content and then threatening to share it more widely. And a documentary filmmaker, Patricia Francesca, was a victim of this particular form of technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And she made a film about her experience called My Sextortion Diary, highlighting how this type of crime is conducted, but also the challenges in getting it addressed by authorities. And in Spain, where she was based, how poor the police response to helping her in this situation was. Doxing is a term, it it's kind of shortened for the sharing of documentation. So docs is short for documentation. And this is, again, something that originally started out as a cybersecurity threat where people were hacking to find private or identifying information about others and then sharing that publicly with malicious intent. But it is a form of attack that is increasingly used against women online to either silence them or to threaten them in other ways by the unauthorized sharing of personal information. Um, Sometimes it's linked to blackmail, sometimes it's linked to uh, trying to stop a woman who is an activist and trying to silence them in some way. Coercive control is another form of harm that is enabled by technologies nowadays. Um, so this is where partners may use technology to control the behavior and control the freedom uh, of their spouse or partner. Um, and again, you know, what may be seen as benign or useful technologies like location tracking technologies that are sometimes used in helpful ways within families, for example, are also misused to control where in these relationships that have become um, toxic to make it harder for an individual, a woman in particular, to have the freedom to move and associate with their family and friends without being questioned by their partner, by their abusive partner, who is trying to control them in some way. And coercive control is, a precursor to more serious forms of violence and domestic abuse, and is it therefore a real challenge, an issue that we need to tackle. Impersonation and identity theft is another way in which technology is used in gender-based violence, particularly in things like catfishing, where people create fake profiles or personalities online, impersonating others to damage their reputation or to gain access to vulnerable individuals. And again, this is a space where AI technologies seem to be being misused by those who are trying to commit this type of gender-based violence. Uh, Economic abuse. So this is again using technology to limit the economic freedom of women by either unauthorized access to bank accounts or monitoring or limiting access to financial services. Um, and even though it's not a form of physical violence, it is a real form of violence by limiting a woman's freedom to use or access their financial resources and be equal to a man as they should be. We also have algorithmic biases and failures, and this is where bias or failure that amplify gendered abuse. This could be in often nowadays we see it in AI systems that have been trained on biased data sets that then perpetuate particular stereotypes or gendered behaviors, and this ranges from everything from hiring and recruitment practices to financial decision making and also law enforcement and so on as well. So there's a whole range of situations in which algorithmic biases affect women and other minoritized groups in harmful ways. And linked to that are these perpetuation of stereotypes. So there are many examples of, again, AI technologies, generative AI technologies, producing and perpetuating stereotypical views of women, particularly around particular professions. So Stable Diffusion had these biases around um, the ways in which it depicted certain professional categories and not depicting women in some and overly depicting women in others. So doctors and nurses is a common example where if you ask an AI, generative AI engine to produce an image of a doctor, it would typically generate a picture of a man, whereas if you asked it to generate a picture of a nurse, it would generate a picture depicting a woman. And so these are perpetuation of gender stereotypes, which are, again, precursors to individuals being biased in their thinking about women and then leading to harmful ways of acting. And then we have biases that lead to over-sexualization or any form of sexually explicit depictions of women being generated by these AI technologies sometimes as well. And there are other forms and new forms of violence that emerge as these technologies get misused in different ways. So, yeah, so these are all very challenging and problematic and things that we need to look at and try to address. And overall, these technologies, what's really challenging about them is that it's not only about the immediate harm that they facilitate, but it's also that chilling effect that they have that inhibit women's participation in online spaces and in life more generally. And that's because these technologies enable perpetrators to affect women's lives, whether that's in their personal spaces, in their family or social spaces, or in the wider world. And that's something we need to look at and address. And that's where the Center for Protecting Women Online is particularly focusing on to address the challenges in online spaces and how we can provide safer and better online spaces that make women feel safer. And so the the rationale for setting up this center is the need to tackle this problem through research that looks at women's online safety from different disciplinary perspectives, but also from different sectoral perspectives. And we've been able to draw together partners and researchers from a whole range of different fields, supported with funding from Research England. And that spans over a 7-year period starting from August of next year. So we've just been through our first year of funded activity, and I'll talk a little bit more about what we've done in that period. And our ethos is very much about being open, outward facing, and collaborative. And we start from an intersectional feminist philosophy. So this is recognizing that while gender is an important factor, it's not the only factor, and the injustices faced by women are also compounded by things like race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status and educational background as well. So there's a whole range of things that are playing together to lead to these harms that women experience, and we need to address them in that collective way and in an intersectional way. So our center is based around these 6 different kind of themes of research and expertise. So we have law and policy, policing, ethical and responsible AI, the future of responsible technology, human behavior and regulation. And then we're supported by a really brilliant professional services team as well. So we're a multidisciplinary group of researchers working with a range of partners from technology organizations, policing organizations, charities and activism groups that are trying to address gender-based violence and so on. And that's one of the unique things about the center is that it's not a purely academic endeavor, but it is really basing and grounding the questions that we explore by working in partnership with these practitioners and experts of lived experience. So some of the things we're doing and the lessons we're learning. Well, a starting point was about the prevalence and experience of online violence against women and girls in the UK. So funded by the Open University's Open Societal Challenges program, our colleague Olga Jurash led a survey across all 4 nations of the UK in 2023, looking at the experience of online violence against women and girls. And it highlighted some really significant challenges where 1 in 10 women in England, more than 1 in 10 women in England, have experienced online violence. 3 in 10 women have witnessed online violence in some form. 7 in 10 believe that the legislation is not effective in tackling this. Um, and 1 in 8 women who experience online violence say that this progressed to a form of violence in the physical world offline. And this was, similar across all 4 nations of the UK. So some really concerning findings. The survey was conducted before the Online Safety Act was in force, and that may help to some extent address that concern about legislation being effective. But I think we recognize that it's not, the Online Safety Act isn't complete in its addressing of this concern, and there are still quite a few things that need to be done. And that's recognized by the government as well in the way in which it's adapted other legislation to address remaining concerns. For example, a recent change in the legislative program to make pornography that depicts suffocation illegal, for example, which didn't exist before. And that's, a very important development, but it's still, again, just a piecemeal approach, and we need more to be done in the legislative space as well. In policing, we did some work looking across the policies and practices of police forces in the UK to try and understand how online violence against women and girls was being addressed. And what we've discovered was there's a lack of consistent national definition of what technology facilitated gender-based violence is in a policing context and what the response should be to it. There's an underreporting of this type of harm, and there's no national intelligence function or leadership in terms of threat intelligence to identify issues. And this is particularly important in an online space where geographic boundaries are um, less of a constraint for perpetrators, and therefore the ability to share intelligence about harms that are being perpetrated across national forces and internationally as well becomes really important. I've already kind of highlighted some challenges with the legislation, and that kind of then translates into a fragmentation of how the criminal law response of policing is in place, and the training in digital investigation is also a gap that makes addressing online harms against women and girls challenging from a policing perspective. We've also looked at the international policy and regulation context. So that's another review that was done in the last year. And we've identified a range of issues and concerns that need to be addressed. And that's something that we're working with our partners to try and influence and address. Some of the key things are highlighted here on the slide, like these regulatory gray zones, but also the failure to keep pace with technological evolution and progress is a real challenge in this space. Policy and law seems to always follow rather than anticipate and put in place protections in advance. And a related issue, and maybe some of the reasons that it is quite challenging, is the evolution of terminology, where, if we look across the different disciplinary perspectives alone, we see that there isn't a consistent use of terminology and definition of concepts that help us make important connections and therefore make concerted effort to address these challenges. And so that's a key piece of work we've done, is to make a start at least on building an ontology of online harms and our responses to them by capturing key concepts like what is an act of online behavior that potentially causes harm, who are the agents that are involved, what are their roles, what is the relationship between legislation and the impact of the act, and so on. So this is a beginning to try and capture this shared terminology in a way that then can be used in our research, but also in the ways in which we engage with policymakers and technology companies and so on as well. we've also been doing quite a lot of work in studying the manosphere, as it's called. So this is this online world that has an anti or non-feminist stance as a kind of background to it, which increases hate and the level of hostility towards women. And it represents people who are living in a separate reality, creating their own terminology and own understandings of the world, and it links to challenges like mental health, isolation, or depression, kind of precursors to boys and men engaging uh, in these online spaces. And there's a kind of process of radicalization in a similar way to that has been seen in other domains, like terrorist radicalization. There are parallels and commonalities to the journey of a man or a boy uh, into this world and then being radicalized and becoming a perpetrator of gender-based violence. And the work we're doing is to um, use computational methods to look at online content, the discussions and conversations that happen around them to better understand how that process of radicalization works, the types of interactions that are leading, online interactions that are leading uh, to people being potential perpetrators of gender-based violence. So that brings me to the area of work that I'm focused on together with colleagues in the center, which is how can we make future technologies safe by design? And safe by design is a term that actually appears in the Online Safety Act, um, but it's not fully understood yet exactly in practice how we do this. Um, Recently, Ofcom, just this week, in fact, have published what they are terming some kind of good practice in design for safe online technologies. But again, these are kind of examples of what could potentially work, but the evidence of how well they work and how we build them into software engineering processes is less clear. And that's the focus, therefore, of the work that I'm involved in, which is about responsible software engineering for online safety. And what we mean by that is how we can build software in better ways, help software engineers make those online spaces safer for women and girls by giving them the processes, tools, and links to regulation and law that make software that is safer for women and girls. And then alongside that, how can we build better software? So what are the features that prevent harms and help us to better investigate harms when they do occur? So how can we make those software products of the future enhance online safety for women and girls? And that links to this Ofcom guidance that's been recently published and is a rich area for further work. Um, so let me motivate this a little with an example scenario. So imagine there's a team that's charged with building an online learning platform, and in line with good practice, some of which is in existing guidance, the team is multidisciplinary, it's diverse, so that different viewpoints are considered as part of the development effort. And so as a result of that, some of the student participants in this team raise a concern that this platform could be used to post harmful content that targets them. Um, and the team discuss this, but then come to a view that the developers raise that, because all the students and tutors will be identifiable on the platform, the likelihood of these harms arising will be very low. So there's an assumption made that because anonymity isn't something that the platform supports, people will self-regulate their behavior to minimize the risk of harms to women and girls. But then, so on that basis, the platform is developed and deployed. And after some time, some of the tutors raise a requirement. They say, we'd like some help producing diagrams to support our explanations to students. And the developers say, absolutely, we could add a generative AI tool that supports that. And that's what they do. So they enhance the tool with this generative AI capability. But then the tutors highlight, oh, we've noticed that the diagrams always depict men as scientists when we ask it to generate these diagrams. And so the developers realized, oh, they hadn't quite considered that form of gender-based harm. So, and they apologize and say, we didn't realize the training data was biased. So let's update the tool. So they deploy a new tool that they think addresses that particular form of gender-based harm. But now a student raises a concern that says, my tutor posted an explicit image. It was deleted later, but was very upsetting, and I want to complain. And the tutor, when it's investigated, says, well, the image was generated when I asked for a diagram to help illustrate the concept of asexual reproduction. And it got posted, but I deleted it immediately. And the developers say, oh, we didn't realize that we updated the software and it changed one of the default settings that prevented that type of image from being created. And so what this example highlights is how the complexities of software development, deployment, and use and its evolution that make it quite challenging to keep track of all the potential ways in which harms could arise and therefore make sure that we minimize the risk of harms. And in this particular situation, it has other consequences in this scenario where because of the Online Safety Act and the potential that a criminal act has been conducted, has taken place in this context, the tutor could be suspended from working while that investigation happens. As part of that investigation, the platform provider is asked to demonstrate how they adopted safe by design as an approach, because that's what's required under the Online Safety Act. And because they couldn't demonstrate that, the development company, gets a significant fine and is financially impacted by that. So this is a really complex and challenging space, in which we don't really have particularly good tools or ways of helping ensure that the risks are minimized. So to summarize those challenges, they arise because there's a limited knowledge of the link between online harms and product features. There's a lack of knowledge about the different disciplinary requirements, legal requirements, ethical requirements, and so on, that the development team may not be thinking holistically about the implications of their design choices as a result of that. It's a changing operating environment. Software gets updated. The implications of those updates may not always be explicit and visible, and particularly when it comes to the potential to cause online harms that are quite serious, they're not always thought through. There aren't good ways to share knowledge and good practice at the moment. And finally, it's not easy for product development teams to demonstrate that they've done the due diligence that they need to do. And so our approach has been to suggest a way to capture this knowledge that using that ontological framework I described earlier, but in a more specific way that allows development teams to relate the features of the software that they're developing to the potential harms that are either enabled or inhibited by those software features, because some features could actually prevent or inhibit harms from occurring, whereas others enable them. So that's part of what this way of modeling the software and having a knowledge base that allows us to think and reason about the software could help. It could also help link the legislative or policy provisions that are relevant to those features because of the associated harms that are linked to. It can also help us understand how these entities and online harms change over time. So if the model is kept up to date, then we can understand the potential impact of those changes on existing software systems. And the models allow us to share that good practice and understanding so that different teams, even within an organization, can build on the experience and knowledge of each other. And ideally, those models could be shared more widely so that across companies, good practice could be shared. And this approach can also help companies document how they chose the product features to reduce the likelihood of online harm. So that, again, allows them to demonstrate that due diligence in minimizing harms. Other work that we've been doing relates to different ways of thinking about software features. So one particular piece of work has been around the warning labels that are associated with generative AI content. And so we did this research that looked at the different ways in which warning labels are presented, um, and understanding the different design dimensions, like the sentiment of the language used on the warning label, the iconography and color, where the warning label is positioned, and the label detail, and so on. And we came up with a set of prototype designs for different types of warning label, and we asked users to tell us uh, their belief in the content, different types of content being AI generated or not, based on seeing the warning label, and how they would behave in response to that. And what we found is that any form of labeling helps increase the belief that content is AI generated. Um, and the neutral labels or icons or text, so things that didn't use emotive language like deep fake or fake, and didn't use like exclamation marks or red banners and things like that, that performed better than other forms. And some recent work by a journalist at the Washington Post highlighted that even though it's understood that warning labels are effective and should be used, most platforms are not using them yet, and that's a key gap. Um, we've also been doing work to look at how software could be designed to promote more positive pro-social behaviors. And so we built this platform called Gratitude Tree, which allowed people to share messages of gratitude for themselves or for others. It was completely anonymous, as in you didn't have to register or identify yourself in any way to use the platform. And you could plant these digital trees and add messages that represented your message of gratitude as leaves of the tree. And what it highlighted was when a platform or service is framed in a positive way, then people engage with it in that way. So even though we had over 20,000 gratitude leaves posted on this platform, none of them contained inappropriate or abusive content. And so that's a really important aspect of thinking about how we design these technologies um, to try and promote a more positive, pro-social engagement behavior. And that's again something that's reflected in the recent Ofcom guidance about the prompts that you give people when commenting or posting, being something that encourages a positive frame of mind and discourages abusive or threatening language. Um, in terms of the ways in which we improve our processes and methods to build software better, uh, we're looking at lessons we've learned from the cybersecurity software engineering work we've done in the past, and how we can build tools, techniques, and processes that make software socially safe by design. And this is about recognizing that developers do care about these qualities of software. So in the cybersecurity context, we found even though there was this zeitgeist that software is insecure because developers don't care about security, when we actually observed developers in professional practice, we found that they do care, but they also are operating in a complex organizational context with other pressures and demands on their time and ability to develop their skills to address their care that is preventing them from doing that. So it kind of highlights the need for a more systemic approach to addressing these challenging issues. And we think that will apply to online safety just as it applies to cybersecurity. And similarly, we need to give developers practical, useful tools that can help them make good design decisions about online safety. And this is analogous to what we found when looking at privacy and the ways in which designers think about privacy, where a lot of privacy frameworks that existed originally were very high level and just had these broad principles of, minimizing data collection, ensuring consent was gathered, and so on, but didn't give developers the more specific guidelines that enable them to pick design features that enhanced privacy. And we find we think we need a similar approach here. Um, and finally, we also need to think about how we could uh, collectively sometimes agree that certain technologies simply should not be built. So how can we think about and systematically evaluate the risks associated with software and software, particularly for online interaction, and get agreement that it shouldn't be developed, or certainly it should only be deployed in particular ways that ensure safety. And here we're inspired by work and thinking called slow computing. And this kind of is analogous to the slow food movement, for example, as opposed to fast food, or slow fashion as opposed to fast fashion, to try and be more deliberative and considerate in how we develop software, evaluating the social safety risks of new technology products, considering things like user attention and data sovereignty as part of that, so that users are empowered and have more control over their online presence and experiences. And again, our hypothesis is that these approaches will help us build new software products that are safer for women and girls, and therefore better for all of us more generally. Eleanor Roosevelt has said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. And I think that's um, a quote that kind of evokes the sense of what we're trying to do in the center. We're addressing a really difficult global challenge that will take concerted effort from many different actors. But the challenge of the scale of that challenge isn't something that should put us off, and that's why we're starting wherever we can, close to home, working with our partners, including technology companies, to try and address this in different ways. And so some of those ongoing activities are about responsible AI frameworks and practices, how we can think about safety by design, think about the impact of these what are known as parasocial relationships that are AI is enabling now, the role of AI companions and their impact on users of those types of AI technologies. So these are all things that we're looking at, and hopefully they all form pieces of the bigger jigsaw puzzle that allows us to address online safety. And in closing, I would say, things that all of us can do is to amplify the awareness and bring survivor experiences to light, share insights with researchers like ourselves to help us be more grounded in our approach and address the real problems that are being experienced. So working in collaboration and supporting change are really key and can hopefully lead to a safer world for all of us. The work I've been talking about is certainly not only my own, but it draws on a huge team of people from the Center for Protecting Women Online. This picture was taken at our conference earlier in the year. So a huge thank you to all of them. And with that, I will stop. If you want to get involved and want to get in touch, please do follow us on LinkedIn or email us or bookmark our website and where we post regular updates. Thank you very much, and I'll stop there, and I guess we'll switch over to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Arosha, for that. That was powerful, informative, interesting. I mean, I learnt words I didn't know existed. I'm sure I'm probably not the only one. It's a hard subject, but I'm so pleased that someone's trying to do something about it. So thank you to you and your team for that. So we'll go over to Q&A. Is that okay with you, Arosha?
Of
Yep.
course, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll just update it now in case there have been some upvotes. There have been some upvotes. There we go. Right. Do you know if primary or secondary schools are implementing lessons or programs to help students understand online gender-based violence? Good question.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really great question. So it's integrated into curricula in different ways. And I think each school has a slightly different approach depending on how they balance their PSHE curriculum, against their sex and relationship education curriculum and personal development. So there are kind of three different areas of curricula that in schools that I'm aware of where this is picked up on in different ways. Um, and so, and I think schools are very much engaged and interested in this. So just yesterday, I was at a local secondary school in Woburn Sands to run a session about White Ribbon Day and how trust and the role of friendships needs to expand to calling out inappropriate sexist language and behavior. And that and the students there were really engaged and very receptive to that message. And one of the things they, even without prompting, highlighted and recognized was the risks in online relationships and friendships versus those that they have in real life or in a hybrid way, and a clear recognition that you don't know who is who online, and therefore, the level of trust you can put in online relationships is extremely limited. So, and that's a really positive thing. I think there's still a lot more to do in this space, but it is very much on the agenda, I think, in schools because, yeah, it affects life in school every day, where things that are happening online in those student communities or family communities or even local neighborhood Facebook groups comes into school in different ways and affects the school day. So schools are very engaged with trying to address that.
Thank you for that, Rosha. The next question, and it may be the last one, because we only have 2 minutes, is quite similar. So what sort of training do you think could be put in place for protections of younger girls and feminine presenting individuals to support recognizing behaviors online and advocating for themselves, particularly in international contexts where we have less control over educating those who may become perpetrators?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in the global context, there's definitely, multiple challenges from, established, well, needing to approach this with some cultural understanding and sensitivity and not assume that a view that we have here in Britain will necessarily immediately translate and transport or a way to address this topic locally. It doesn't mean it's not recognized as needing addressing. It just needs to be adapted appropriately to that context in a global setting. I think the types of mechanisms that are needed are ones that encourage and support ongoing conversation, so that these are not issues that are addressed effectively by a single webinar or running a workshop, a one-off workshop in any setting, whether that's a school or elsewhere. So it's about opening up space for that dialogue and ongoing conversation and giving teachers, educators, the resources that they can use to make that happen and feel supported and able to have those ongoing conversations in schools or in youth groups or wherever that appropriate setting would be. So some of my colleagues at the center, Rose Capdevia and Lisa Lazard, who are both professors of social psychology, are working with colleagues at another university in Chichester, looking at developing some tools relating to this technique method called the theater of the oppressed. So this is a kind of form of theater which is very much led by sharing experiences of harm or injustice, but then using the audience's responses to that and kind of improvising and continuing a conversation and dialogue that brings to light issues, but also helps co-create potential solutions where, people can contribute how they have dealt with that in the past, for example, and being able to share those experiences can be very empowering, both to the sharer but also to those listening. But again, that these are techniques that we have some understanding of, but have never been properly explored in a school setting and understood as to what are the frameworks and tools we need to provide to educators to make it effective and useful. And that's something that they're doing in their research. So, hopefully I'm very excited to see how that develops and what might come of it.